Analysis. On March 5, 2026, the Finnish government unveiled plans to amend the Nuclear Energy Act of 1987, a law that had explicitly prohibited the import, manufacture, possession, and detonation of nuclear explosives on Finnish territory during both peacetime and wartime for nearly 4 decades. Finnish Defense Minister Antti Hakanen stated that the change was necessary to enable Finland's military defense as part of the alliance and to take full advantage of NATO's deterrence and collective defense. The security environment, Hakanen said, had fundamentally and significantly changed since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Finnish President Alexander Stubb was equally direct in characterizing the amendment's purpose. Finland does not need nuclear weapons in peacetime. The measure is about deterrence, ensuring that the infrastructure is ready if a crisis demands it. If your infrastructure is ready, Stubb stated on March 13, 2026, that is the clearest possible way to tell your adversary not to cross the line. The Kremlin's response came within 24 hours. On March 6th, Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov told reporters that Helsinki's position leads to an escalation of tensions on the European continent, and that these statements create vulnerabilities for Finland. As quoted by the Moscow Times, Peskov added, "By placing nuclear weapons on its territory, Finland will begin to pose a threat to us, and if Finland threatens us, we will take appropriate measures." The statement, in the assessment of analysts tracking Russian strategic communications, reflects less a calibrated warning than an admission of strategic discomfort. Russia's conventional military capacity, strained to its limits by more than 4 years of sustained attrition in Ukraine, cannot adequately defend a 1,340-kilometer border against a NATO-integrated Finland while simultaneously prosecuting a grinding land war hundreds of kilometers to the south. The geography that drives Moscow's reaction. Finland shares the longest land border of any NATO member state with Russia. Its territory places NATO assets within reach of St. Petersburg. But the number that drives the most acute concern in Moscow's strategic calculus is different. Finnish territory sits a few hundred kilometers from the Kola Peninsula. The Kola Peninsula is Russia's single most strategically irreplaceable piece of real estate. It is the home of the Northern Fleet and the basing area for Russia's nuclear-armed ballistic missile submarines, SSBNs, whose second strike capacity forms the foundation of Russia's deterrence against the Western alliance. The submarines stationed there are not merely military assets. They are the insurance policy of the Russian state. Without them, Russia's claim to nuclear superpower status is structurally undermined. Finland joined NATO in April 2023 as the alliance's 31st member. Its subsequent integration into NATO's nuclear planning structure has been explicit. Stubb confirmed that Finnish membership ensures full participation in that framework. The March 2026 Nuclear Law Amendment is the legal mechanism that converts that participation from conceptual to operational. The French deterrence dimension. The amendment's strategic significance is amplified by a parallel development in European nuclear architecture. On March 2, 2026, French President Emmanuel Macron outlined a new deterrence framework at the Élysée, describing what he characterized as forward deterrence, a posture that could include dispersing French nuclear-capable aircraft onto Allied territory during a crisis period, while retaining the nuclear launch decision exclusively within French national authority. France and Germany have since established a joint nuclear steering group. If Finland's legislative amendment passes and Finnish territory is formally incorporated into NATO's nuclear deterrence infrastructure, that territory could become eligible for French nuclear-capable aircraft during a designated crisis threshold. The operational consequence would be nuclear strike capability positioned within range of the Kola Peninsula from a direction Moscow has never previously been required to defend against. Stockholm has engaged in parallel. Swedish Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson confirmed that Sweden has begun holding talks with France and the United Kingdom on nuclear deterrence arrangements following Sweden's accession to NATO as the alliance's 32nd member in March 2024. The military architecture on the ground. Russia's response to Finnish NATO membership, the construction of new barracks at Petrozavodsk, the capital of the Republic of Karelia, the establishment of a new military installation outside Kondopoga in the Murmansk region, less than 150 kilometers from the Finnish border, plans to raise troop presence in Karelia from approximately 3,000 to 15,000, and 80 Su-35 and Su-27 fighter jets operating patrols from Besovets Air Base, runs directly into a question Putin cannot answer publicly. Where are the soldiers? They are in Ukraine. The 44th Army Corps, planned for the Petrozavodsk region, was announced against a backdrop of Russian forces sustaining casualty rates, the Telegraph confirmed, at approximately 40,000 per month since November 2025. The barracks in Petrozavodsk are shells. The planned border reinforcement is a planning document against an empty manpower budget. Against that picture, Finland has deployed substantially different numbers. Cold Response 2026 saw NATO deploy 25,000 soldiers from 14 nations to Finnish terrain, training at -30°C. The exercise demonstrated collective defense capacity numerically superior to what Russia is attempting to station on the other side of the border, with equipment and training that the Russian formations cannot match. Finland's 3 NATO headquarters represent genuine command integration, not symbolic presence. The Mikkeli Army Headquarters functions as NATO's strategic coordination center for the Northern Front, the brain that would manage ground operations in a Northern European conflict. The Rovaniemi Forward Army Headquarters in Lapland provides purpose-built Arctic warfare command infrastructure in a domain of growing strategic relevance as climate change opens Arctic sea routes and makes previously inaccessible terrain militarily consequential. The Riihimäki Communications and Information Headquarters, projected for operational status in 2027, will integrate NATO's digital command network across the entire Nordic-Baltic region. Finland's defense doctrine and mobilization architecture. Finland's approach to national defense is rooted in an institutional memory that predates NATO membership by decades. The Winter War of November 1939 to March 1940, in which the Soviet Union, the largest military force on Earth at the time, spent more than 3 months failing to break through Finnish defensive lines before achieving a negotiated territorial settlement rather than the rapid conquest it anticipated, remains embedded in Finnish defense doctrine and political culture. The legacy is visible in specific capability investments maintained throughout the Cold War and the post-Cold War period, in which most European states drew down their conventional capabilities. Finland operates Western Europe's single largest artillery reserve. Its mobilization system, when fully activated, can deploy 870,000 trained reservists to field positions. The government's stated target is 1 million individuals trained and ready for crisis deployment in a country of 5.6 million, a ratio of defense preparedness that has no equivalent among comparable European populations. Military service remains mandatory for Finnish men, with reservist obligations extending to age 60 or 65. Women serve in increasing numbers on a voluntary basis. Finland's defense budget is on a trajectory toward 3% of GDP, above NATO's 2% benchmark and above most alliance members' actual expenditure. The combination, a fully mobilizable trained reserve of nearly 1 million, NATO command infrastructure on the territory, a nuclear law amendment opening the door to alliance deterrence assets, and geographic control over approaches to Russia's most sensitive strategic installations, represents a transformation of Finland's security posture that was complete within 36 months of Russia's February 2022 invasion. The Gulf of Finland and the Baltic Sea closure. Finland and Estonia together effectively control the mouth of the Gulf of Finland. Coastal anti-ship missile systems positioned on both shorelines are capable of denying free passage to Russian naval vessels through the strait. Russia's Baltic Fleet, historically an instrument of regional power projection, now operates in a fundamentally altered environment. From the moment its vessels leave port, they are within range of NATO sensors, aircraft, and missile systems across the full length of the Baltic. The Baltic Sea has, in the assessment of multiple NATO analysts, become a closed NATO lake. Finland and Sweden's accession to the alliance in 2023 and 2024, respectively, sealed the last geographic opening in the alliance's Baltic perimeter. The strategic implications for Russia's naval operations in the region are permanent, as long as both countries remain alliance members. Hybrid warfare, border closure, constitutional amendment, property restrictions. Russia's attempt to destabilize Finland has not been limited to military signaling. In the winter of 2023, more than 300 asylum seekers were organized and directed toward remote Finnish border crossings in what Finnish authorities assessed as a deliberate hybrid operation designed to overwhelm border processing systems, generate internal political division, and stress social cohesion, a pattern consistent with documented Russian operations in other European countries. Finland's response was rapid and legally significant. The government closed the entire border and amended the Finnish constitution to authorize border guards to reject asylum seekers without individual case assessment when national security conditions required it. The 200-kilometer section of the 1,340-kilometer border, currently equipped with high-technology sensors, cameras, and physical barriers, is scheduled for full-length expansion in stages. The investment is substantial. The legal and constitutional changes required to implement it were treated as non-negotiable. In October 2022, 3 Russian citizens approached local authorities with an offer to purchase a long-abandoned nursing home near Niinistalo Garrison, one of Finland's most important artillery training installations, at approximately 15 times the building's assessed market value. The Finnish Ministry of Defense blocked the transaction. The government subsequently passed legislation explicitly banning Russian citizens from purchasing property near military installations, treating real estate as a potential vector for hostile surveillance and intelligence operations, rather than a purely economic asset class. These security measures carried documented economic costs. The town of Nuijama on the border once processed approximately 2 million crossings annually, sustaining local commerce through trade with Russian visitors. Those crossings are gone. Unemployment in Finnish border communities has reached 18.2%, nearly double the national average. The Finnish public's acceptance of these costs reflects the cultural weight that the Winter War and its lessons carry in Finnish civil society. The price of commercial disruption is comprehensible and recoverable. The price of miscalculating a neighbor's intentions is not. The precision strike dimension. According to analysis from SIPRI, the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, air-launched precision strike missiles already possessed by Finland and Norway are capable of reaching deep into Russian territory, including the Kola Peninsula. This is not a theoretical capability under development. It is an operational reality in the current inventory of 2 NATO member states that border or are adjacent to Russia's most sensitive strategic zone. Ukrainian drone operations in June 2025 demonstrated that striking high-value strategic assets in the Kola region, specifically the Olenia airbase, is not a theoretical possibility. It has been executed. The precedent exists in documented operational practice, not only in planning assessments. The SIPRI analysis also noted the escalation dynamic this creates. Moscow looks at precision strike capabilities in Finland and Norway and assesses a potential first strike risk against Northern Fleet infrastructure. Helsinki looks at the 44th Army Corps construction and the Murmansk installations and assesses a territorial threat to Finnish sovereignty. Both sides are correctly identifying real military capabilities. Both sides may be miscalculating the other's intentions. The SIPRI assessment is that threat perceptions on both sides are being driven by worst-case assumptions rather than careful capability versus intent analysis. The U.S. commitment variable and European deterrence autonomy. The trajectory of U.S. commitment to European security has been a subject of active political debate under the current American administration in ways that have directly accelerated European investment in autonomous deterrence capacity. When the reliability of Article 5 guarantees is treated as a political variable rather than a settled institutional commitment, the incentive structure for European states to develop their own deterrence architecture shifts fundamentally. Finland, as a new NATO member whose security calculus was built on the assumption that collective defense meant U.S. engagement, has particular exposure to this variable. The Finnish defense establishment has been explicit that NATO membership provides the framework for Finland's security, but the investments Finland is making, the border fence, the reserve expansion toward 1 million, the nuclear law amendment, the welcome of French deterrence concepts on Finnish territory, reflect a defense posture that is being built to function even in scenarios where transatlantic commitment is uncertain. The France-Germany Nuclear Steering Group is the most visible institutional expression of this shift at the European level. France's nuclear arsenal has always been explicitly national in its command structure. Charles de Gaulle's doctrine of independent deterrence has never been abandoned. What Macron's March 2nd announcement changes is the operational posture of French nuclear-capable aircraft, from territory confined to potentially dispersed onto Allied soil during crisis periods. The decision-making authority remains French. The geographic reach of the deterrent signal expands to wherever French aircraft can operate. For Finland, the practical implication is that European nuclear deterrence capacity, with its own command structure, its own strategic rationale, and its own institutional permanence independent of any single national election, is now a realistic complement to transatlantic deterrence architecture. The 1987 nuclear law was written when that complementary architecture did not exist, and when Finland was not an alliance member. The amendment being debated in 2026 is being written for a different strategic environment in every relevant dimension. The escalation management problem. The SIPRI analysis introduces a dimension that analysts tracking the Nordic-Baltic transformation have consistently flagged. The distinction between defensive capability and perceived offensive threat is not self-evident from the other side of a border, particularly when the capabilities in question are the same physical systems, regardless of the intent behind their deployment. Precision strike missiles capable of reaching the Kola Peninsula from Finnish and Norwegian territory are, from Helsinki's perspective, a deterrence asset, raising the cost of aggression against Finnish territory to an intolerable level by threatening the assets Russia values most. From Moscow's perspective, the same physical capability presents as a potential first strike threat against the nuclear infrastructure, whose survival is the precondition for Russia's strategic deterrence posture. The asymmetry of interpretation is not resolvable through declarations of intent, because declarations of intent have no operational force in a crisis. This is the classic security dilemma operating at nuclear-adjacent intensity. Both sides are building or acquiring capabilities whose defensive rationale is internally coherent and whose offensive interpretation is equally coherent to the adversary. SIPRI's warning that threat perceptions are being driven by worst-case assumptions about the adversary's intentions rather than careful assessment of actual capabilities describes a dynamic that has historically been managed through a combination of crisis communication channels, transparency measures, and engagement frameworks designed to reduce the probability of misinterpretation under stress. Whether those frameworks currently exist at the level the Nordic-Baltic situation demands is a question that the public record does not definitively answer. Finland and other Nordic NATO members have been clear that deterrence and defense are the objectives. Russia has been clear that it views the transformation as threatening. The gap between those characterizations is wide, and the Baltic airspace incidents, Russian naval vessel movements with military escorts through contested waters, and the May 2025 Su-35 incursion into Estonian airspace during the Jaguar tanker interception all demonstrate that the operational environment is volatile enough for accidents to produce consequences that neither side planned for. The Swedish transformation in parallel. Sweden's accession to NATO in March 2024, as the alliance's 32nd member, completed a Nordic transformation that, taken together, represents one of the most consequential shifts in European security geometry since the Cold War's end. Sweden had maintained military non-alignment for over 2 centuries, longer than the United States has existed. The speed of the decision, from political discussion to formal accession in under 2 years following Russia's 2022 invasion, is a measure of how completely Russia's actions altered the fundamental political calculus in Swedish society. Together, Finland and Sweden transformed the strategic geometry of the entire Nordic-Baltic region within a 12-month window. Where Russia previously had access to a relatively permissive northern flank, it now faces an unbroken chain of NATO territory from the Baltic states through Scandinavia and into the Arctic. The geographic corridor that previously gave Russia strategic access to the Baltic and the North Sea approaches is now fully enclosed by NATO member states on both shores. Sweden brings specific capabilities that complement Finland's. The Swedish Air Force, equipped with Gripen fighters and operating from dispersed basing architecture across Swedish territory, adds depth to NATO's northern air defense posture. Swedish submarine forces operating in the Baltic have direct implications for Russian naval movement. Swedish territory's geographic position provides NATO with surveillance and interdiction options for Russian forces attempting to operate in the northern Baltic approaches that did not exist before March 2024. The 2027 horizon and what follows. The near-term trajectory of Finland's security transformation is on a defined timeline. The Riihimäki Communications and Information Headquarters becomes operational in 2027, completing the NATO command triad on Finnish soil. The border fence construction continues in stages toward full coverage of the 1,340-kilometer line. Reserve force expansion is ongoing toward the 1 million target. The nuclear law amendment is progressing through the Finnish legislative process. The medium-term decisive variable is the nuclear law outcome and what follows from it. If the amendment passes and Finnish territory is formally incorporated into NATO's nuclear deterrence architecture, potentially including French nuclear-capable aircraft under Macron's forward deterrence framework, the strategic balance on Russia's northwestern border will have shifted in a way that the Kremlin cannot offset through any combination of measures currently available to it. Russia cannot easily add to its nuclear arsenal without destabilizing its relationship with China. It cannot redeploy significant conventional forces northward without further weakening its Ukraine position, and it cannot negotiate Finland out of a democratic legal decision made in response to 4 years of Russian aggression. The long-term variable is the Ukraine war's outcome and the shape of Russian military capacity in its aftermath, and the trajectory of U.S. commitment to European security, which has been a subject of sustained political debate under the current American administration. A Europe that has embedded its own nuclear deterrence architecture, as France and Germany are actively constructing, is less dependent on a single transatlantic decision than it was when Finland was neutral and the Nordic-Baltic perimeter was open. That shift, from transatlantic dependence toward European deterrence autonomy, is itself a consequence of the same Russian decision that produced Finland's NATO membership. The self-reinforcing nature of the transformation Putin triggered in 2022 is visible across every dimension of the Nordic-Baltic security architecture. Each defensive measure creates a new capability that Russia must account for. Each Russian reaction to that capability creates a new political justification in the affected country for the next defensive measure. And the resources Russia would need to counter the cumulative transformation are being consumed at 40,000 casualties per month in a theater hundreds of kilometers to the south. The self-inflicted strategic trap. The strategic situation Russia faces on its northwestern border is a direct consequence of decisions made in Moscow. Putin's 2022 invasion of Ukraine was presented internally as a measure to prevent NATO's eastward expansion and halt the erosion of Russia's strategic buffer. The outcome has been the precise opposite. Two nations that had maintained military non-alignment for decades, one for decades, the other for more than 2 centuries, joined the alliance within 24 months of the invasion. The transformation of the Nordic-Baltic security environment is now irreversible under current conditions. The Baltic Sea is a closed NATO lake. 3 NATO command headquarters operate on Finnish soil. Finland's nuclear law is being amended to remove the legal barrier to alliance deterrence assets on its territory. France and Germany have established a joint nuclear steering group whose deterrence assets could be positioned on Finnish territory during a designated crisis threshold. And Finland's mobilization architecture can place nearly 1 million trained individuals in defense positions from a country of 5.6 million people. Russia's conventional military capacity to respond to this transformation is severely constrained by the attrition rate in Ukraine. The planned northern buildup runs into the same manpower arithmetic that makes the 44th Army Corps a planning document rather than a deployed formation. The escalation Russia has signaled through Peskov's statement on March 6th is a statement from a country that has less capacity to respond to the situation it is describing as threatening than it had when the situation did not yet exist. The nuclear law amendment, if passed, will represent the completion of a legal transformation that matches the geographic and military transformation already underway. Finland in 2026 is not the Finland of 2021 in any dimension that matters to the strategic calculation Russia made when it launched the invasion whose consequences it is now managing.